Now, on to charging by induction. This involves transferring charge between objects without them physically touching. The key piece we've added here is this ground wire. We still have the insulator, which protects this sphere from either losing electrons to the ground or electrons coming up, but we now have this ground wire, which is going to play a very significant part. The process will start by bringing a negatively charged rod. We could have used a positively charged rod, but in this case we'll use negative. And you can see how there are more negative charges than positive here. We will bring it near the sphere. What happens is the negative charges here will repel the negative charges in the sphere. They will build up on this side. And then since there is a ground wire here, these negative charges will flow down into the ground. Remember, the Earth is an ultimate sink for all electrons. They will flow down, and then we will be left behind with the positive charges here because, as we talked earlier, protons are not going anywhere. They're too heavy. They're locked in the middle of the atom. So we will be left with a positively charged sphere. While the negatively charged rod remains near the sphere, the ground is removed. That is key. The ground has to be removed while still in the presence of the negative rod. Now, note, there can be no more movement of electrons into the sphere. The insulator is protecting it from ground. We've opened up this connection so no electrons can flow there. They cannot jump the gap between the rod and the sphere or between the ground and the sphere. There's no jumping of electrons up here. Air is too good of an insulator. The rod is now removed. It is pulled away here. It is important to note that the charge on the rod is the same. No charge left the rod or entered the rod because it was still separated by an air gap between it and the sphere. However, the sphere lost electrons to the Earth, so it now has a net positive charge. So we now have a plus 4Q, where originally we had 0. It picked up this charge from the Earth. However, compared to the amount of free electrons already in the Earth has gained an insignificant amount of charge. Charge is still conserved, of course, right? We have plus 4Q here. Since we originally had 0, the Earth has now picked up a minus 4Q. Please remember the order. The ground wire has to be disconnected first. Had we pulled the rod away first, the electrons that were pushed down into the Earth would have just rushed back up through the ground wire into the sphere, keeping it neutral. To summarize, through physical contact, a charged object will transfer a portion of its charge to a neutral object. That is called conduction. Because of the conservation of charge, the amount of charge on the initially charged object will decrease. For example, we had the rod here. Let's say it had a charge of plus 4Q, and we had a sphere here with 0 charge on it. Not the best sphere, but you get the idea. After they touch, and then I pull them away, the rod will now have 2 plus, and the sphere will have the other 2 plus. You still have 4 positive charge, 4Q, but it's split between the two objects. The same thing would happen, of course, if this were negative charge. If these were 4 negatives, they touch, 2 negatives would be left behind on the sphere, and the rod would have 2 negatives also. However, the total charge remains the same as we had in the beginning. Induction has 2 major differences between it and conduction. Number 1, the objects are brought close to each other, but there is no physical touching. In addition, the neutral object will be grounded. It will have an electrical conducting path to ground. The charged object will repel similar charges on the neutral object to the ground. Thus, the neutral object will be left with a charge opposite to the initially charged object, whereas in conduction, the neutral object is left with a charge that is the same as the initially charged object. In induction, the initial object, such as the rod, will not lose any charge. The extra charge that shows up on the sphere, or the initially neutral object, comes from the ground. And as long as the ground is disconnected before the initial object, the rod, is removed, the neutral object will gain charge. Of course, if you leave the ground there and pull the rod away, the extra charge will flow either to or from the ground and it will stay neutral. That's this point right here. If the ground were left in place, once the initially charged object was removed, the neutral object will pass its gain charge back to the ground. So the order in which you remove the rod or the ground is critical to making induction work.